Jack the Ripper was supposed to remain a mystery forever. But after 137 years, DNA may have finally exposed the monster hiding in the fog. We are going to reveal the name, the science, and the story. But what nobody tells you is how this man, a known and violent person, was allowed to roam free. The evidence does not just point to a suspect, it points to a man the police were watching. DNA from a shawl recovered at the scene of one of his crimes has amazingly shown a 100% match. The truth is not just who he was, it is why they let him get away with it. This changes the whole legend. Science versus the phantom. The whole story, the final answer, comes down to one single object: a stained, torn silk shawl. For over a century, the legend of Jack the Ripper was just that, a legend. A ghost story made of fog, gaslight, and shadows. He was the unsolved phantom, the predator who confused Scotland Yard and vanished into history. Hundreds of suspects, zero proof. Everyone was obsessed with the idea that he had to be someone special. A brilliant surgeon with a dark secret, a crazy artist, even a member of the royal family. The Masons planned the murder of the women who were blackmailing a member of the royal family, Prince Albert Edward Victor, who was Queen Victoria's grandson. But here is the catch. The evidence that finally exposed him was not a complex conspiracy. It was a piece of fabric said to have been found at the scene of the Ripper's fourth victim, Catherine Eddowes, on September 30th, 1888. This shawl was passed down through the family of a policeman who was at the scene. For decades, it was just a creepy curiosity. Most experts dismissed it as a fake, just one more piece of Ripper stuff in a market full of it. So, here is the deal. In 2007, an author and amateur investigator named Russell Edwards bought it at an auction. He was convinced it was real. He risked his money and his reputation on one final, desperate gamble: to use technology the Victorian police could not even dream of. Edwards tracked down Dr. Jari Louhelainen, a world-famous expert in genetic analysis from old, damaged samples at Liverpool John Moores University. This was not like a fresh TV crime show. This was a piece of silk that was over 125 years old at the time of the test. It was contaminated by countless hands, by time, and by the weather. Getting anything from it was considered a miracle. Dr. Louhelainen and his team got to work in a sterile lab. They focused on the stains. Using advanced techniques, they carefully pulled out the tiny genetic material left behind. They were looking for something called mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA. Mitochondrial DNA does not go through the same mixing that happens in the other 23 chromosomes. So your mitochondrial DNA is passed down whole from your mother, who got it from her mother, and so on. What most people do not realize is that mtDNA is like a genetic time traveler. Unlike regular DNA, which is a mix from both parents, you only get mtDNA from your mother. She got it from her mother, and so on, passed down in one unbroken female line for thousands of years. It is tough. It lasts a long time, and it is the perfect tool for solving a historical case. The first test was simple. Was the shawl even real? The team tracked down a living descendant of Catherine Eddowes' sister. They took a sample and compared it to the DNA from the bloodstains on the shawl. It was a perfect match. The shawl was real. It had been at the scene, soaked in the victim's blood. That alone was a huge discovery. But then they found something else. Mixed in with the victim's DNA were other tiny samples. Specifically, samples consistent with semen. This was it. This was the perpetrator's genetic signature, left behind in his moment of terrible rage. Now came the final step. Edwards and the team had a main suspect, a man whose name was already whispered in the original police files. They tracked down a living female-line descendant of that suspect's sister. They got a sample. They ran the test. Again, it was a match. After 137 years, the science pointed with 100% certainty to one man. And it is not who you think. It was not a prince. It was not a doctor. It was not a famous artist. His name was Aaron Kosminski. So, what does it mean to you for him to be officially and formally named? Closure for the family, which is really important, but really the end of, for me, 25 years of a very long story. But Kosminski was not some new discovery. He was the man police suspected all along. The asylum secret. The name Aaron Kosminski means nothing to most people. It is not a name that sells books or inspires blockbuster movies. And that is exactly the point. The wow factor here is not that the Ripper was a glamorous celebrity. The wow factor is that he was a 23-year-old Polish immigrant who worked as a hairdresser in the very heart of Whitechapel. He was not a phantom. He was a local man, and the police knew exactly who he was. Kosminski had fled Poland, then part of the Russian Empire, to escape the brutal pogroms, and had arrived in London with his family, settling in the East End. By all accounts, he was a deeply troubled man. He was known to be mentally unwell, suffering from what modern experts believe was paranoid schizophrenia. He was haunted by dark visions, hearing voices, and a deep, violent hatred of women. This is not just guessing. This is what the police at the time believed. While the public and the newspapers were going crazy over the Dear Boss letters and theories about mad doctors, the top police officers on the case were quietly building their own short list. And Kosminski's name was at the very top. Chief Constable Melville McNaughton wrote a famous internal memo in 1894 that named Kosminski as a main suspect. He described him as a man who had a strong urge to kill and was against women. But here is the catch. The most chilling evidence, the real bombshell, comes from Chief Inspector Donald Swanson. Swanson was the man who oversaw the entire Ripper investigation. He was there on the ground every single day. Years later, after he retired, he got a copy of his boss's memoirs. In the margin of the book, right next to the section about the Ripper case, Swanson wrote a private note. He wrote that the perpetrator was Kosminski, the man who was sent to an asylum and died there. This changes history. The officer in charge of the case privately confirmed the man's identity. And get this, Kosminski lived right in the middle of the murder locations. He was known to be violent. And then, in 1891, his family finally had him placed in an asylum where he stayed for the rest of his life. And when did the Jack the Ripper murders stop? Exactly when Aaron Kosminski was taken off the streets. The DNA, the timeline, and the secret police testimony all point to one frightened and violent man. He was the monster. But to understand the monster, you have to understand the nightmare world that made him. How London built a monster. To understand the terror, you have to understand the world that shaped him. The London of 1888 was not the charming city of top hats and carriages you see in movies. And that is putting it lightly. It was a tale of two cities. While the rich lived in grand houses in the West, the East End, especially Whitechapel, was a living nightmare. It was one of the most crowded, diseased, and desperate places on earth. Whitechapel was an area where you had many homeless people and drifters. You had what were known as the common lodging houses. Over 900,000 people were packed into a few square miles, a tangled mess of narrow, dark streets, dark alleys, and hidden courtyards. We are talking about population densities of over 1,000 people per acre. The air itself was poisonous. A thick yellow pea soup fog, a mix of river mist and black coal smoke from thousands of chimneys, choked the city. This fog was so thick, you sometimes could not see your own hand in front of your face. It was the perfect cover for a predator. There was no safety net. Poverty was not just an inconvenience, it was a possible death sentence. The heart of this world was the lodging house, or doss house. These were filthy, horrible places where you could rent a bed or even just a spot on the floor for a few pennies a night. Some offered a 4-penny coffin, which was literally a coffin-shaped box to sleep in. Others just had a rope stretched across the room for men to lean on as they slept standing up. For the women who became the Ripper's victims, life was a constant daily struggle to find those doss pennies. They would do anything for the price of a bed, just to avoid sleeping in a dark alley. This is what made them so vulnerable. They were not glamorous. They were middle-aged, poor, and desperate women. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes and Mary Jane Kelly. They were trying to survive one more day. They had to walk the streets late at night, in the fog and the dark, looking for any way to earn the price of their bed. What most people do not realize is that this environment did not just hide the monster, it helped him. The police were completely overwhelmed. They had no radios, no forensic science, no fingerprinting. Their main tools were a whistle and a wooden stick. In the maze of Whitechapel, a man could commit a terrible act and disappear into the fog and the crowds in less than a minute. The predator did not need to be a genius. He just needed to be local. He needed to know the alleys, the shadows, and the escape routes. And he needed to know who to choose. The women so desperate they would trust a stranger for a moment, and so poor that no one would notice they were gone until it was far too late. The streets were a trap, and the police, for all their efforts, were about to be sent on a wild goose chase by the media. When a criminal became a legend, with the city screaming for answers, the London Metropolitan Police launched one of the biggest manhunts in history. They filled Whitechapel with officers. They interviewed over 2,000 people. They detained and questioned at least 80 men. They followed every single lead. So why did they fail? Yeah, about that. They were not just fighting a man, they were fighting the time they lived in. And they were fighting a media circus that they helped create. First, there was no such thing as forensic science. The idea of a crime scene was brand new. When a victim was found, crowds would rush in. Reporters would step all over evidence. The scene would be contaminated in minutes. Police had no fingerprinting. They had no blood typing. All they had were witness reports from people in dark, foggy streets. Some said he looked shabby. Others said he looked respectable. It was useless. What is truly wild is that they did find clues, but did not know what to do with them. Near the scene of Catherine Eddowes, the same victim from the shawl, they found a piece of her bloody apron. On the wall above it, someone had written in chalk, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Was it a clue from the perpetrator? Was Kosminski, who was Jewish, trying to frame his own people? Or was it just anti-Semitic graffiti? We will never know. The police commissioner, Sir Charles Warren, worried it would start anti-Semitic riots, so he ordered it erased immediately. They washed away one of the only pieces of physical evidence they ever found. Consequently, that is why police were made to erase the graffiti to take away any suspicion from the Masons. Then came the letters. The predator became a global celebrity when the famous Dear Boss letter arrived at a London news agency. It mocked the police and promised more to come. And it was signed with the chilling name that would echo through history: Jack the Ripper. The problem? Everyone is obsessed with this, but almost all experts now agree it was a fake, probably written by a journalist at the Star newspaper to sell more papers. But it worked. It created a media frenzy and sent the police on a wild goose chase, sorting through thousands of copycat letters. But here is the catch. One letter was real. The "From Hell" letter, sent to the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, arrived with a small box. Inside was half of a preserved human kidney. The letter claimed it was from one of the victims. And get this, Catherine Eddowes had her kidney removed by the predator. While the public was obsessed with fake letters and wild theories about doctors and royals, the real predator was walking among them. The case went cold. But now, 137 years later, the science has been challenged. The legend that will not die. So that is it, right? Case closed. The DNA from the shawl points to Aaron Kosminski, the police's #1 suspect, whose institutionalization matches the exact end of the killings. It is a perfect fit. Well, not so fast. This is where the story gets complicated and where you have to decide for yourself. The moment the DNA findings were published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences in 2019, critics came out swinging. Their biggest argument, in one word, was contamination. The shawl is over 137 years old. It has been handled by police, by the original owner's family, by collectors, and by Russell Edwards' own team before it ever got to a sterile lab. How do we know the DNA found is not just from one of them? So, what do you think? Is the DNA match the final answer? Or is the real Ripper still laughing at us from the shadows? Let us know in the comments. And do not forget to like and follow for more mysteries.